This is literally everything about lost media, the history of it, how it happens, why people care so much about it, how people search for it, the different kinds of it. And at the end, we are going to look at where this whole world of disappearance and recovery might be headed in the future. Let's begin. Imagine you're in a small room sometime in the early 2000s. It is late. The monitor in front of you is thick and heavy, in that way old monitors used to be. The internet is slower than it is now. Pages have backgrounds and sidebars and odd little buttons. Forums feel alive. People still make strange personal websites. And somewhere out there, someone is trying to find something they saw years ago. Maybe it was a cartoon. Maybe it was a commercial. Maybe it was a song that played once late at night. Maybe it was a website that looked too strange to be real. They do not remember all of it, just a fragment, a face, a melody, a line, a logo, a feeling. They search for it, nothing. Years pass, they search again, still nothing. And at that point, whatever that thing was stops being just a piece of media. It becomes a mystery. It becomes a missing object. It becomes a question with edges people can feel but cannot quite touch. And human beings are not very good at ignoring questions like that. We are not very good at leaving empty spaces empty. If there is a gap in memory, if there is a shape in culture that seems like it should be filled, people keep returning to it. That is where lost media begins. And when most people hear that phrase, they usually think of one very specific thing. Maybe some lost cartoon episode, some creepy commercial, some deleted video, some famous internet mystery. But lost media is much bigger than that. It is not just one niche category of weird old stuff. It is not just creepy things. It is not just obscure things. And it is not just things that are old. Lost media is media that once existed in some form, was made, aired, published, recorded, distributed, or remembered, and can no longer be fully accessed the way it once could. That sounds simple enough, but it opens up a huge world. A silent film that burned in a studio vault. A television episode that aired once and was never shown again. A radio broadcast that was not recorded. A prototype of a video game that appeared in a magazine and then vanished. A website that used to exist but now survives only in screenshots and broken archives. A deleted YouTube video that people still talk about years later. A song that everybody seems to remember and nobody can identify. A children's show known only through hazy forum posts and one or two scattered clues. All of that belongs here, and once you notice that, you start to realize something important. Lost media has existed for as long as media has existed. In fact, if you stretch the idea far enough, it has existed for as long as human beings have been making things that could be forgotten. Long before the internet, long before film, long before radio, people were already losing pieces of culture. Ancient plays survived only by title. Poems were referenced in other texts, but disappeared themselves. Paintings were described but destroyed. Songs were sung and then lost because nobody wrote them down. Stories traveled orally until the chain broke. Whole libraries vanished in war, in fire, in neglect, in time. The modern internet did not invent disappearance. What it did was make disappearance feel more personal, because now the missing thing can be something you almost touched, something you remember seeing, something you half expected would always be there, and that changes the emotional texture of the whole subject. If an ancient scroll disappears, that is tragic in an abstract historical sense. If a website you used to visit every night when you were 14 disappears, that feels different. It feels closer. It feels like part of your own memory has been made inaccessible. Lost media often sits in that strange area where history and personal nostalgia overlap. Now, the first great age of modern loss was probably early film, and the scale of that loss is honestly hard to overstate. In the early days of cinema, preservation was nowhere near as systematic as people now assume it must have been. Film was entertainment, yes, but it was also physical stock, commercial product, something costly to store and easy to neglect. Nitrate film was notoriously flammable. Prints were damaged. Studios reused materials. Some films were not considered important enough to save. Some were simply allowed to decay. Fires wiped out collections. Archives were incomplete. Record keeping was inconsistent. And because of that, enormous amounts of early film are gone. Entire performances, entire stories, entire visual worlds gone. And what is strange about that is that these were not obscure things at the time. Some of them were real public releases. People saw them, people reviewed them, advertisements ran for them, actors built careers in them, audiences sat in theaters and watched them. They existed in the world. And then later, through a mixture of accident, carelessness, changing technology, and shifting priorities, they slipped away. That basic pattern shows up again and again in every medium. Radio was often live and not always preserved. Television was regularly erased or taped over. Master recordings were reused. Regional broadcasts aired once and vanished. Local stations shut down and tossed out material. Home video was fragile. Game builds were overwritten. Websites were redesigned until nothing of the old version remained. Flash disappeared and took huge chunks of early internet culture with it. Online games shut down and entire digital worlds went dark. Apps were removed from stores. Platform pages vanished. Creators deleted uploads. Passwords were lost. Hard drives failed. Formats died. Servers went offline. This is one of the most important things to understand about lost media. It usually does not vanish in one dramatic moment. It drifts out of reach, quietly, slowly, almost politely. A company closes, a file is moved, a copy is damaged, a tape is mislabeled, a login is forgotten, a machine that could read an old format stops working, a site is no longer worth maintaining, a storage room gets cleared, years go by, and only then does somebody ask the question, wait, where did that go? And once that question is asked, the thing changes. It stops being ordinary. It becomes charged with absence. That is the real power of lost media. Not just that the object is missing, but that enough remains around it for people to feel the missing space. Maybe there is a screenshot. Maybe there is a TV listing. Maybe there is a magazine ad. Maybe there is a clip. Maybe there is a voice actor credit. Maybe there is an old forum post. Maybe there is just memory. Not enough to settle the matter, but enough to keep it alive. And that is where the internet enters the story in a really interesting way, because the internet is both one of the greatest machines for forgetting and one of the greatest machines for remembering that humans have ever built. On one hand, it feels permanent. It gives the impression that everything is stored somewhere, copied somewhere, cached somewhere, mirrored somewhere. On the other hand, it is full of fragile things, dead links, deleted pages, broken embeds, lost uploads, abandoned accounts, half-working captures, vanished platforms. Digital culture often looks permanent from the outside and turns out to be astonishingly brittle up close. But when the internet works in the other direction, it allows people to remember together. One person in one country remembers a commercial. Another person remembers seeing it too. Someone else has a partial recording on an old VHS tape. A fourth person recognizes the logo in the corner. A fifth person finds a newspaper listing that gives a date. A sixth person checks an archive. A seventh person emails someone who worked at the station. And slowly, collectively, a missing thing starts to take shape. This is one of the most fascinating parts of lost media culture. It turns ordinary people into a kind of volunteer archive. People become researchers without formal training. They compare fragments. They collect clues. They scan old magazines. They buy old tapes. They search old domain records. They translate obscure posts. They dig through local recordings. They piece together timelines. They get very, very good at noticing small details. And because of that, lost media is not just about missing objects. It is also about the communities that form around searching for them. These communities can be surprisingly methodical. From the outside, it might look like people are just following rumors. But the best searches have structure. A claim appears, evidence is gathered, leads are evaluated, false memories are separated from real ones, time periods are narrowed down, broadcast regions are identified, credits are checked, old catalogs are searched, personal collections are contacted, archive snapshots are compared. And sometimes the breakthrough comes from somewhere completely ordinary. A tape in a closet, a backup disc in a drawer, a forgotten hard drive, a burned CD labeled badly but still readable, a box in an attic, an off-air recording someone kept for no special reason. That is one of the strangest and nicest things about this whole subject. Cultural survival often depends on very unglamorous accidents. Somebody saved something without realizing its future value. Somebody was lazy in exactly the right way. Somebody held on to an old machine. Somebody forgot to throw out a folder. Somebody recorded over most of a tape, but not all of it. Somebody kept a magazine under a bed for 20 years. Somebody archived a page out of habit, and because of that, a piece of the world survives. Now, it helps to break lost media into categories because the subject gets huge very quickly. The first category is lost film and television. This is the classic one: missing episodes, unaired pilots, regional broadcasts, alternate cuts, censored versions, station bumpers, local programming, shorts, animation, opening titles, continuity announcements, things that aired once and were never repeated. Sometimes the show itself survives, but one episode does not. Sometimes the audio survives, but not the video. Sometimes only stills remain. Sometimes only scripts or production documents remain. Sometimes all we know is that a broadcast happened because it appears in a newspaper listing or a TV guide. And what makes this category so compelling is that it sits between public and private memory. These were things that were out in the world. Somebody saw them. Often lots of people saw them. But if no copy survives, that public event collapses into fragment and rumor. The second category is music. Lost songs are especially haunting because music can stick in the brain with very little information. A few seconds of melody can live in somebody's memory for years. A chorus can survive without a title. A low-quality snippet can circulate without anybody knowing the artist. There are also unreleased tracks, radio-only recordings, alternate mixes, deleted uploads, obscure regional releases, private pressings, and old songs shared on platforms that disappeared. Music travels strangely. It gets copied informally, mislabeled easily, and remembered emotionally. So when it goes missing, it often leaves a stronger ghost than people expect. The third category is video games. This category is absolutely massive. Prototype cartridges, demo discs, canceled projects, beta content, unfinished builds, online-only titles that vanished when servers closed, flash games, browser games, removed mobile games, event-exclusive demos, region-locked versions, missing patches, lost mods, development footage, internal documents, art books that hint at content that no longer survives. Games are complicated to preserve because they are not always one object. A film can survive as film. A song can survive as sound. A game often depends on hardware, software, formats, updates, operating systems, peripherals, servers, and communities all functioning together. Sometimes a game technically survives, and yet the actual experience of it is still lost. The fourth category is internet-native lost media, and this is where things get especially rich. Deleted YouTube channels, vanished fan pages, dead forums, old social media accounts, weird little websites, early webcomics, hosted animations, personal pages, odd experiments, custom Flash intros, abandoned archives, broken ARGs, pages that now exist only in partial captures, whole clusters of online culture that were once active and now feel almost dreamlike. This is such a powerful area because a lot of people have half memories of the internet itself. Not just specific content, but mood, the sound of a page loading, the look of a forum skin, the kind of weird banners that used to exist, the little games, the page glitter, the MIDI music, the chain of links that took you somewhere strange at 1 a.m. The internet used to feel much less centralized, much more handmade, much more accidental. So when those spaces disappear, people are not just looking for files. They are often trying to recover the feeling of a whole lost environment. And the fifth category is partially lost media. This category matters because not everything is either fully found or fully missing. Sometimes what survives is incomplete. A clip with no context, a damaged tape, a screenshot, a transcript, a promotional image, a script draft, a voice recording, a recreation, a photograph of a screen, a few seconds of footage from a longer missing program. In some ways, this can be even more compelling than total absence because partial evidence gives the mind something to work with. It creates shape without closure. It lets people imagine the missing whole. Now, once you understand the categories, the next question is obvious. Why do people care so much? Why do people spend years searching for things that, in many cases, are not even especially important in the traditional sense? Part of it is nostalgia, obviously. A lot of lost media is tied to childhood, and childhood memories have this strange quality where they often feel brighter and stranger than adult memory. Things seen once at the right age can stay with you for decades. A weird bumper, a frightening logo, a half-understood cartoon, an old website, a song heard in the background of a store. And because those memories are linked to time and feeling, searching for them is not just searching for information. It is searching for a room, a season, a self. Part of it is also the psychology of unfinished things. Human attention tends to cling to what is incomplete. A missing page, a locked door, a fragment of melody with no ending. The mind wants to resolve patterns. It wants to close loops. Lost media creates loops that can stay open for years. And then there is the pleasure of the search itself. Because a good lost media search has all the elements of a mystery, but in a strangely quiet form. There is an object, there are clues, there are timelines, there are false leads, there are witnesses whose memories may or may not be reliable, there are archives, there are gaps, there are moments of sudden discovery. And because the stakes are usually cultural rather than physical, the whole thing can unfold in a way that feels eerie without being frantic. That is why this subject is so good for long, calm storytelling. It has mystery built into it, but it is not always violent mystery. It is often archival mystery, memory mystery, media mystery, which is a different texture entirely. Of course, not every search ends in success. Sometimes the media is found, and it turns out memory exaggerated it. Sometimes the only surviving copy is too damaged to restore. Sometimes the owner will not release it. Sometimes legal issues block access. Sometimes the original was destroyed beyond recovery. And sometimes, maybe most interestingly, the thing people are looking for never existed in the form they remember. This happens more than people like to admit. Memory is not a perfect recording device. It is reconstructive. It combines details. It fills in gaps. It borrows from similar things. So somebody may sincerely remember a television character, a jingle, and a visual style as one object, when in reality those details came from 3 different sources. Lost media culture often lives right on that border between memory and evidence, and that makes it intellectually interesting in a way that goes beyond mere nostalgia. Sometimes the mystery is, where did this thing go? Sometimes the mystery is, what exactly was this thing in the first place? That distinction matters. It is also where the culture around lost media becomes a real subculture rather than just a random set of internet searches. Because communities form their own standards. What counts as lost? What counts as found? Whether a private copy changes the status of a piece of media. Whether restorations should be altered or cleaned too much. Whether unreleased works should be shared if the creator did not intend that. How much evidence counts as enough. Whether a recreation helps or confuses. These communities develop arguments as values, famous cases, running jokes, recurring terminology, and a kind of shared archive of their own. In other words, lost media is not just about disappearance. It is also about preservation culture, and preservation culture is one of the more beautiful things the internet has produced. Because beneath all the noise, all the speed, all the algorithmic churn, there are still people spending hours trying to save a tiny piece of cultural texture that might otherwise vanish completely. A bumper, a page, a song, a build, a tape, a forgotten little thing. And that matters more than it first appears to, because culture is not only made of the official masterpieces, it is also made of disposable things, local things, strange things, cheap things, experiments, failures, oddities, advertisements, side projects, jokes, weird little fragments. That is what an era actually feels like when you live inside it. Not just the great monuments, but the texture around them. Lost media reminds you of that. It reminds you that entire decades were filled with small, human-made objects, most of them not designed to last, many of them not expected to matter, and yet together they formed the atmosphere of a time. When they disappear, the big history remains, but the texture gets thinner. And that brings us naturally to weird internet history more broadly. Because once you start thinking this way, the internet itself starts to look archaeological. You stop seeing it as one giant, seamless thing and start seeing layers. Old social platforms, forum cultures, fan rings, forgotten host sites, abandoned browser games, long-dead communities, weird corporate microsites, early streaming pages, custom homepage culture, chain email aesthetics, odd corners of the web that existed intensely for a few years and then almost completely vanished. For younger people especially, some of those spaces can sound almost imaginary, a time when websites were uglier but often more personal, a time when finding things online felt less like browsing one massive centralized feed and more like wandering through alleyways. A time when the web felt stitched together by curiosity rather than flattened by optimization. And because those spaces were often fragile, huge parts of them did not survive intact. The code survives sometimes, screenshots survive sometimes, archives survive partially. But the actual feeling of moving through those spaces often has to be reconstructed after the fact from fragments, memory, and context. That is part of what makes internet history and lost media so naturally connected. The web preserves pieces, but not always atmosphere. It preserves fragments better than it preserves experience. And that is maybe why so many people find this whole subject weirdly calming, because it is about slowness, looking closely, piecing together fragments, respecting memory but also checking it, following threads, opening boxes, reading old posts, listening carefully. It is a subject built out of traces. Now, if we are really trying to cover everything about lost media, we should probably talk about the future of it too. And the future is interesting because in some ways preservation tools are better than they have ever been. Storage is cheaper. More people understand the value of archiving. Communities are larger. Search tools are better. Restoration tools are better. AI can help with transcription, cleanup, comparison, and detection. Public awareness of digital fragility is growing. All of that makes it tempting to say that we are moving toward a safer age for media. But in another sense, loss may be getting stranger, not simpler, because modern media is increasingly platform dependent. A file is not always just a file anymore. It may depend on an account, a service, a license, a subscription, a server, an update path, a device, an authentication system, a recommendation chain, a cloud backup, a storefront. A game may become unplayable when servers die. A stream may never be fully captured. A platform may quietly bury old content. A digital experience may be altered without announcement. Entire archives may be inaccessible not because they are destroyed, but because they are locked behind systems that no longer function. And then there is the volume of creation now. The sheer quantity of media being produced is so enormous that even if preservation tools improve, huge amounts will still fall away simply because nobody can save everything. Some of tomorrow's lost media is being uploaded right now by people who assume it will always be there. It will not. That sounds a little bleak, but it also explains why the subject never really ends. As long as media keeps being made, media will also keep being lost. As long as culture moves forward, some of it will slip through the cracks behind it. That is not a glitch in the system. In some sense, it is part of the system, which leaves us with a bigger question. What should be saved? Everything? Only the important things? And who decides what important means? Studios, platforms, archivists, fans, collectors, algorithms? That question does not have an easy answer. Preservation takes time, money, labor, and storage. Rights issues complicate access. Privacy matters. Creator intent matters. Not every deleted thing should automatically be forced back into public view. Not every unfinished thing was meant to survive. So the future of lost media is not just technical, it is also ethical. It is about what memory means in a world where copying is easy, but keeping track of everything is impossible. And that, I think, is why this whole topic expands so naturally from odd little internet mysteries into something much bigger. Once you spend enough time with lost media, it stops feeling like trivia. It starts feeling like a very gentle way of asking what cultures keep, what they neglect, what individuals remember, and how fragile the things around us really are. Because the internet is not a perfect memory. It only feels like one when the link still works. Lost media is the moment after that illusion breaks. It is the moment when people realize that even in a world built out of copies, things can still disappear. Maybe not always absolutely, maybe not always forever, but enough to become uncertain, enough to become partial, enough to become ghostly. And yet people keep looking. That is maybe the nicest part of the whole story. People keep looking. Someone remembers a page. Someone else remembers the sound it made. Someone finds a screenshot. Someone finds a broadcast date. Someone checks a tape. Someone recognizes a logo. Someone searches an archive. Someone sends an email. Someone opens a box in a basement. And every now and then, something comes back. Not everything. Probably never everything. There will always be things that stay gone. Things we know existed but can no longer touch. Things that survive only in description. Things that become folklore. Things that blur with memory until nobody is fully sure what they once were. But even that has its own strange kind of beauty to it, because lost media is a reminder that culture is alive enough to be incomplete, memory is alive enough to be uncertain, the internet is alive enough to forget, and in those gaps, people still reach for one another. One person remembers, another person listens, a third person searches, a fourth person finds a clue, and for a moment, something that had slipped almost entirely out of the world is gently placed back into it. That is the story of lost media. From ancient disappearance to burned film vaults, from erased broadcasts to dead websites, from prototype games to broken archives, from childhood memory to collective search. It is a long story and a very human one. It is the story of how culture vanishes, and also the story of how people try to keep it from vanishing completely. And it is nowhere near over, because somewhere right now, on some old drive, in some mislabeled folder, on some dusty tape, in some server backup, in a box in a closet, or in the memory of somebody who has not thought about it in years, the next missing thing is waiting quietly, still there, or almost there, just beyond reach, until somebody goes looking. And maybe, on some future night, they will find it. And for a brief moment, a broken link in the history of culture will be joined back together. Anyway, that is more than enough to carry into sleep. The pages are dim, the links are old, the archives are quiet, and somewhere in the distance, another search is already beginning.